on the one hand, it's been very bad, particularly for regular retail. But for people who are doing D2C, it's actually been a boon,
Oh,
right?
it blew up like crazy. It's a game changer, right? Our clientele changed. Like we had a lot of big local businesses, and now we're all direct to consumer brands, globalized. It's crazy.
Direct-to-consumer brands have been a rising market sector for over a decade. The massive shift to online shopping during the pandemic was the rocket fuel that propelled many new brand launches and made many traditional brands aware of the huge opportunities in selling online. From potentially better margins to building closer engagement with consumers, most brands have made direct-to-consumer a priority. While D2C doesn't necessarily mean that the consumer purchases the product online, it does rely heavily on online promotions. And that's where the going can get tough. Very tough. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me today on A Seat at the Table. Each week, I sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their experience, expertise, and insights about succeeding in business and in life. Social media has been a key channel for promoting D2C brands. However, to succeed, it takes a lot more than simply posting photos to your feed. In a hyper-competitive market, brands need to be more strategic, to find unique tactics that can set them apart, and that can help manage those massive advertising and marketing costs that are now part of growing a brand. David Morneau is the go-to guy for brands who want out-of-the-box strategies for building their brands online. His social media agency, InBeat, has run wildly successful campaigns for D2C brands that help them uncover hidden market opportunities and then support them in effectively implementing them to their full potential. Today he joins me to discuss one of his most effective tactics. He'll dive into why it works, potential problems that brands could face, and how to use it effectively. As a bonus, he'll share an innovative way that brands can get valuable market feedback from influencers at no cost. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop knitwear collections that will be social media superstars, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair is a rich resource featuring well-edited, high-quality collections, as well as cutting-edge technical innovation, not to mention outstanding trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. You can learn more at spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. There's also a link in the show notes. And check out our website. You can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table, the show notes, news about our upcoming workshops, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Now let's hear about how David is helping D2C brands crush it on social media. I'm delighted to have you on the show today, David, because what you're talking about is so relevant to most of my particular audience, which is how do you market these D2C brands? How do you connect right with Gen Z or millennials? How do you do all of this online? And particularly in social media has been a tremendous blessing because there's no barriers to entry. But on the other hand, as you know, it's just wildly competitive because there's no barriers to entry. So I think that everybody is very keen to figure this out and to see, where they can learn, where they can find people to help them. You're running an agency doing specifically this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we essentially specialize more specifically in working with micro-influencer market and micro-influencers across the board. So that's what we do.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you define a micro-influencer and
Yeah.
why is there an opportunity with someone who I'm guessing is very niche as opposed to opting for someone who's a big influencer?
Yeah, so let's start off with like a little backstory on like the micro influencer kind of landscape.
Okay.
We've got a lot of people that are creators, just creating stuff, creating content, posting it on social media. They're gathering a small amount of following, right? COVID accelerated that. We probably have a lot more micro influencers than we used to, just because these people have a small follower count, but they do have a dedicated audience that interacts with their content, whatever it is, lifestyle content, fashion content, or it could be, we see a lot of arts and craft and so forth kind of projects spawning. So a micro influencer to us is essentially anyone with 5,000 to 20,000 followers, 25,000 followers on Instagram, and then on TikTok we qualify them as 100,000 to 250,000 followers. TikTok, just being the follower behemoth that it is, it just gives a lot more people the occasion to build much larger followings. So that's how we qualify it. It's a very loose definition, but one of the traits that you'll usually see across all micro influencers is that you're not dealing with an agent directly, you're dealing with the creator themselves. So that's really the main distinction.
Right. So what do you see as the advantages then of working with these micro influencers?
Yeah, so there are a lot of them. So there are a lot. So that as a DTC brand or any brand that's looking to work with micro influencers, it just gives you a buyer's advantage. You can negotiate across the board with multiple micro influencers. There's a lot more micro influencers than direct to consumer brands. So right there, you have an edge on that front where you have a huge negotiation leverage. They're also really good creators, right? They're extremely good at creating content. Not all of them, of course, but you're going to get a lot of good content out of like a cheaper price per influencer, which is going to give you those assets that you can reuse in your other channels, right? We're talking paid media. Most direct-to-consumer brands are built behind Facebook ads, so you could reuse that content to power your Facebook ads, for instance, and then that's really an advantage. So cheaper cost per asset, and then cheaper risk, right? You don't have as much risk. If one collaboration goes south, then at least it didn't cost you all that much compared to when you're orchestrating collaborations, $10,000, $50,000, or $100,000, right? The media spend is a whole different game on that front, and it just changes. So that's why I'd say micro influencers are a good bet in that case.
Right. How do you find these people? I mean, because they're probably a little bit less visible than some of the big influencers. How do you go about finding the ones that you feel would actually be the best? And I suppose, how do you vet who you think once you determine who's in that space? How do you vet who would be the right person?
So that's a really good question. Finding them, we built our own tool under our InBeat umbrella. It's InBeat Software, InBeat.co. But if you're looking to run a smaller scale campaign, you definitely manual research is probably going to go a long way. Just go and look at the hashtags, right? Say you're looking for gardening influencers, look at gardening, hashtag gardening, just go through those posts and find creators that are relevant, that have a decent follower count, that are creating good content. And the biggest criteria we look at is really content quality, because we put such a heavy weight on what content means to us that we really vet all of our influencers for content first. I mean, good content goes a long way for a brand, much beyond the distribution of their channel, but like it can be reused. So that's really what we put the emphasis on. So we'll make sure that they create good content. They understand what good photography looks like, and so forth. So yeah, that's how we vet them.
So it's not an easy process. I mean, it's more labor intensive, and it really involves the skill set that you've developed as an agency to be able to go through and really understand what meets these certain standards.
Yeah. So, I mean, where an agency like ourselves really comes in hand is really when you're looking to scale this. Working with 4 or 5 influencers as a brand, it's pretty straightforward. I don't know if you have a team and you can assign someone to do so, just find a couple influencers and then work with them, orchestrate easy collaborations, don't overcomplicate it, negotiate with them and so forth. It's when you're trying to scale. We're talking like 100, trying to activate 100 influencers every month or 200, right? That's when it becomes a real challenge, and it becomes, you have to orchestrate these things. We use CRMs, right, to make sure that we keep on top of the ball. These influencers are not business owners, so they won't be posting as fast as you'd expect them to, even though they said they would. So you have to make sure you keep an eye on that. You have to make sure that you keep an eye on like the content guidelines, make sure that they respect everything. So there's a lot of hand holding, which is where it becomes interesting to recruit an agency when you're really looking to scale that program. And the first 10 influencers, I'm pretty sure all brands should do it in-house. Just get a feel, get a pulse for it, what it feels like, and so forth. It's pretty straightforward and doesn't require much work.
Right. But like anything else, like you're saying, when you scale it, it's a lot of work, and you need somebody 100%. Who's on it. Yeah. That's because for sure.
Because the tools you're going to use to get 10 influencers are not the same that you're going to use if you are working with 200 influencers, right? And that's really where it breaks down. Like your Gmail inbox starts to make no sense. It just like the tools don't make sense anymore. So you have to gear up and use the right tools and take it from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of times when you look at something, it seems simple, But like you said, when you're doing it at scale, it's actually a very different kind of a job. Now,
Oh, 100%.
when you're looking at all these influencers, how are you able to measure, or what do you set as benchmarks to determine who's coming through for your client? Because I'd imagine if you're managing 100 or 200, you're trying to keep seeing who's doing well and maybe shifting in and out of different ones to make sure that you're getting the most out of your efforts. What are some of the things that you're looking for to measure?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? We do with the clients, what we do is we'll set a minimum benchmark of like, here's the engagement rate we should expect, and here's the follower count we should expect. And then, one of the big questions is like, do we want the swipe up link in a story or no? Is that important to us? If so, then we need to start the benchmark at 10,000 followers, because that's a feature that's unlocked at 10,000 followers. So that's really like one of the plays that we'll be setting with the client is like, okay, well, what kind of engagement rate are we looking for? And then more importantly, like, what kind of content are we looking for? Is this video content? Are we looking for photography? Are we looking for like studio-ish photography? What are we looking for in terms of content? And that's going to set the threshold for like, okay, has this influencer done video content in the past? Yes or no? Are they doing reels? Yes or no? Are they engaging in Instagram TV? Yes or no? Right? And then it's just these questions that we ask to set the threshold. But essentially, once we've got that, it's all an onboarding game. So we vet the influencers before they come in, and then we have the advantage of being an agency, meaning that we've collaborated with 25,000 plus micro influencers at this point, rough figure. So we know which influencers in the past have worked well for some of our clients, which haven't. So we've got that data edge on our side. So we use that to vet new influencers as well. So to keep it simple, just set a minimum engagement rate, minimum follower count. Decent engagement rate is going to be 2-3%, depending, especially for these micro influencers. Anything above that, it should be fine. If it's too high, then it falls into another category where there's a lot of people that are participating in what's called engagement groups, where they buy each other's likes. So they don't buy each other's likes, they trade likes essentially. So you end up with posts that have massive engagement, and then you're like, well, no, that's fishy. You look through the likes, and you realize that all the people that are liking their stuff are people are micro influencers with a decent amount of following. So they're all participating in this network of like exchange. So be careful about that. It's one of those things that's really hard to track. But yeah, that's essentially what we'd look at. Sorry, I went on a tangent here. Explain, and then.
No, that's okay. It's really interesting because it's a different world than tracking some of the more traditional types of advertising and marketing. And yet you still have to track it to be able to see, am I getting any return on investment, right? You still need to know, okay, a lot of people like my stuff, but is anybody buying it? Because ultimately, if people aren't buying it, it just becomes a hobby, so to speak.
Yeah, let me tell you something, Jane, about what we're seeing across all of our clients is let's say we work with 100 influencers, like 4 of them are going to drive enormous amounts of sales, and then 10 of them are going to drive some sales, but not that many. And then the rest won't drive any sales. That's the reality of this model. You have to build that roster of people that are going to drive sales for you. And then, you have to track it, right? Give them a promo code. If that's your goal, if that's your objective is really just driving sales, give them a promo code, a link, track it, make the efforts trackable, and then build your roster of influencers that are working well, re-collaborate with them, treat them as ambassadors, give them commission, right? That's how you want to build that program, because if you pitch 100 influencers and you expect every one of them to drive sales, you're not going to get that. I can guarantee you. So it's not how it works, but you will have some outliers that will drive enormous amounts of sales. We're talking 50 to 1, right? In regards to return on ad spend. If you look at it and it's like, well, okay, what happened there, right? And why are the other ones not driving any sales? So, and then you can build a hypothesis around that and say, okay, well, why does this person drive more sales? And then you can find more influencers like this person and so forth, and grow from there.
Right. And usually you need to be working with about 100 influencers to be able to start to see some of that come through. You need a big enough group to be able to have that small percent that drives those sales.
So let me unpack that a bit. So if you're looking to just tip your toes in the water, right? I'd recommend just looking who's following you on Instagram, who's your client that are already, do you have influencers right now that are purchasing your client, your stuff, right? And then that's a really important question because these people will drive much more authentic piece of content, right? They will be putting forward, they're your client already. So, the content they will be creating is not, it's already coming from a good place, meaning that they've already bought from you and you've never incentivized them to post. So, that's a really good place to start. So I'd start there. And these influencers will probably drive sales just because they're authentic, right? And then if you're looking to work with your clients on that front, the definition of an influencer really changes. I'd say like someone with 1,000 followers is now an influencer, right? Because they're your client. So, they're going to have an incentive to talk about you in a good way. So that's really, yeah. So to answer your question of the 100 influencers, I think anyone who's trying to do influencer marketing should at least, pitch 50 to 100 influencers, not in the intention of working with all 50 to 100, but with the intention of getting what's the price per post look like? What does the price per story look like, right? To get an idea. And then from there, it becomes much easier to negotiate. If you're only pitching 3 to 5 influencers and some influencers tell you $2,000 is my collaboration, $1,000 my collaboration, that's not the real price. But if you have that if you're unlucky and you run into these kind of influencers that are trying to charge much higher, then all of a sudden that becomes what you feel is the collaboration price. So really pitching 50 to 100 will give you a good idea of like, okay, what can I get away with in these posts? Like what could I expect these influencers to do? And yeah.
So you get to see what the market price really is.
Exactly, 100%, exactly. That gives you enormous amounts of leverage once you know, like, okay, well, I can get this kind of influencer for this much, and yeah.
Yeah, very interesting, because I think that a lot of people aren't sure what they're supposed to be paying, and a lot of it's hearsay. There's a lot of confusion surrounding the right tactics, because obviously there's a lot of different social media, and it changes all the time in terms of the algorithms and in terms of what people are watching and what they're responding to. So it is complicated if you're looking to do it for real, and it's a business and you need to be driving sales. It's actually, you're sitting there wondering, what do we do? Where should we be putting our budget? Where should we be putting our efforts? You had mentioned something really interesting, and that was about seeding influencers.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? How does it work?
So seeding is giving without expecting anything in return. That's how we qualify it, right? So let's imagine a scenario where we find 100 influencers and we tell them, hey, we'd love to send you our product, no strings attached, right? Just like, give it a shot. We send it to you. Like if you like it, we'd love a post from you, but there's really no strings attached here, right? So we're doing gifting, product exchange, right? We're not looking. So, and then what we're betting on here is like, okay, well, we can defer the cost of collaborations and get like much more authentic content by getting these influencers to actually post if they want to, right? Of course, in a process like that, we'll have follow-ups like, hey, how did you find our product? Feel free to let us know if you have any feedback, if you need anything from we're just customer relationship management kind of approach to it, right? And then the goal is really to get product exchange to create content for us. So we're aiming at like, let's get 65 to 85% of these creators to create content while shipping them product for free, and let's see where that lands. And then we're going to take it from there. So the vetting is much less intensive, works extremely well for brands with a low cost of goods sold. That's really where this shines the most. Like let's imagine a brand that has a COG of like $30 to $60, and this starts making a lot of sense. Kind of breaks down in other scenarios where you're selling something for much higher price points than you'd want to expect them to post and so forth. But yeah, to determine with your specific direct-to-consumer brand and see if it fits.
Right. So how does that compare? And I suppose it varies per product, but generally speaking, how does that compare with when you're actually paying an influencer to post, in terms of the results that you get, in terms of either consumer engagement or hopefully conversion into an actual sale? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
I mean, it compares really. Both approaches work really well. So, the kind of pay to win model is really good for brands that don't have that much brand equity built into them, right? Some brands just have amazing missions that they're changing the world in some way or the other, or they give the impression that they are. And for these brands, product seeding is extremely powerful because people want to buy into that mission. It makes it extremely easy to just get these influencers on board and posting, because they love the mission, right? And then it's less transactional. So meaning that you need to invest more into okay, well, let's create a special packaging for them. Let's add a note in there, right? You have to think about these things to get because your goal is to get as many of them to post as possible. So that's how it compares. Whereas if you're paying for a post, right, it's pretty transactional. You can expect one post and one story to come back, and then you're shipping the product, and you're going to get that no matter what.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. So basically, people ideally, unless you do have, like you said, one of those huge stories to tell, ideally you would be trying a dual strategy of paid influencers as well as trying to seed other influencers.
And don't get me wrong, maybe you're in a niche, maybe you're in do-it-yourself arts and craft and whatever. You have an extremely engaged audience, and then they would react well to your product. And in that case, it can make sense to try a product seeding approach. I test the water with both, to be honest. Just try to hey, we'd love to give you product, no strings attached. We'd love a post if you like our product, and not if not, no worries. We're all here to your feedback. Thanks, right? And then the other approach is hey, we're willing to pay you X amount for a post, and then that amount can vary from $100, to $600 depending on the influencers. I just try things and then set a price point and go from there.
Right. So there's a lot of experimentation that's involved in this.
Yeah, and every niche is different. Every financial, fintech kind of products are much harder to kind of promote because influencers in that space are expecting much higher rates. So, there's tons of different things that you need to take into consideration. Whereas, mom influencers on Instagram, there's a lot of them. So, if you're selling a kids clothing brand, you can get away with a product seeding without too much of a hassle in that case.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if you have a client and they're working with influencers, whether it be a paid influencer or seeding an influencer, do you recommend that they also do a lot of posting on their own on social media in addition to working with influencers?
100%. And I recommend aligning your content calendar with the influencer content, right? That's one of the beauties of running a program with influencers is that you end up with all this user generated content that you can reuse across all of your social media. And when I mean all your social media, I mean all your social media, right? If you're doing reels, repost that on TikTok. If you're doing TikTok, repost that in reels. And if you're doing still images, repost that in carousels. And then, make sure to tag these influencers right into your posts. And then, potentially send an email to your newsletter and say, hey, here are the posts of our top creators this week, right? Use it across the board. This UGC is extremely relatable. People absolutely love it. And it's an extremely strong asset to repurpose across all of your marketing.
So because you've paid them to promote your product, you can actually record and repost what they've done without copyright infringement or anything like that.
Exactly. So that's something to take into account when you're drafting up the agreement with them, right? Hey, do I have copyrights on this? How does it work? You can think about that during the process. If you're doing a product seeding approach, you can just email the influencer, hey, we love your content. We'd be willing to give you a $100 gift card to our store, right? Use it however you want. And then we just want to use it in our paid media. Or hey, would you be kind enough to let us post your post to our social media? We'll tag you, of course, right? Or hey, we'd like to use your post in our next newsletter. Would you be willing to let us do that, and so forth, right? So really depends on how you structure the agreement. If you're doing seeding, just make sure you ask the influencers. If you're doing payments, I'd recommend you just put it in your agreement right up front with the influencer of, hey, we want to be able to reuse this. And yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Because I know sometimes, you run into these copyright issues with different social media. In fact, oftentimes on YouTube, right, is very picky about that and will
Yeah.
flag your stuff and kick you off if they think you're using something that's not rightfully yours.
Yeah, that's YouTube is notorious for that, right? It's
Yeah, they are actually. They're real. I
yeah.
mean, it's good. It's good that they're strict and that they're, protecting people from copyright violations. But you do have to nowadays really understand the intricacies of that and make sure that, you've got it worked out in advance, as you probably know.
100%.
So if someone's getting involved in this, and like you said, you have to be posting your own stuff as well as working with influencers, how much do they have to post of their own stuff? I mean, sometimes you start to see the market just goes crazy with people posting nonstop, right? I think the height of all of this is probably a DTC brand called Shein, right? Where they say that they're putting up, I think, 6,000 different images a day. And you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, it's just, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I mean, you don't have to get to that level, right? But what I'd say is, like, first of all, you can repost on Instagram, like use your old posts and go back. I try to keep an active social media calendar. All brands have different strategies, but repost as many of your influencers as you can. It just makes it makes it easier for you. The influencer gets visibility. They're super happy, right? So it's just I have no hard number on that, unfortunately. I'd say, try to post as much as you can, but 6,000 a day might be a little too much.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Right. As long as you're getting a couple of things out there every day, you should be good.
Exactly. And I mean, you repost a story, one post, and then, you add one of your posts potentially, and that's it, right? You've got a good social media cadence there. And
yeah, that should be good. Now, you mentioned something else that I thought was pretty interesting, and that was using influencers to be able to create content. Is that what you mean by actually having them talk about your product and then reposting that? Or is there some other aspect to that?
Yeah, so the question is okay, well, what type of content do you want? If you start with that approach, right, you have to, let's say you sit down with creative team, like you're saying, okay, we want GIFs of our product. We want videos of our product. We want, still images of our product in some different concepts, right? What in a camping concept, and we'd like to have our product in a kitchen concept. And, you just go ahead with these mood board kind of ideas, kind of like you would, creatively scope out a project like that. And then what you can do is you can actually build your network of influencers around these content ideas that you're looking to distribute. So for instance, if you're looking for Instagram reels, well, that you're going to be looking for creators that do reels and that their feel for reel is good, right? Because if your influencer doesn't do any reels and you're asking a reel out of them, they might not be so good at it, right? So you're taking a risk there. But you want to align essentially your influencer discovery and with the content you're looking to create. And influencers, like these micro influencers, are extremely good at creating good content. They kill it. They absolutely destroy it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing to see what people do, especially when a lot of them are basically don't have a huge studio or crew or anything backing them up. They're doing it on their own, and it's incredible.
I mean, yeah, new iPhones and everything is the tons of tutorials on YouTube on how to create good content. These people there's a good network of amazing creators out there that you can tap into as a brand, and it's just going to simplify your whole life in terms of marketing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you had also mentioned the fact that you can work with influencers to actually get market research back. How does that go?
So during the onboarding process with a micro influencer, we'll ask them questions such as hey, or after they receive the product, depending on how you want to structure it. But, hey, if you were marketing director at our brand, what are we missing that you would change, right? Kind of just ask questions like that, crowdsource the knowledge to and then imagine having 100 people answering that, right? Or what's your biggest pain point with X, right? With the product. And then, you hear back from them with the pain points, then you can reuse that in your copywriting. If you were X brand, what kind of product would you release in the upcoming year? What are the trends that we should watch for, right? And then you just ask that to all the creators you onboard and make them feel part of the team, and works amazingly well. And then you can also ask hey, how was our product packaging? Like, how was your product experience? Was it like anything you would change, right? And then you can get tons of insight out of that, tons and tons of insight out of that.
Yeah, that's really a very interesting exercise to go through, because you're right. They're going to tell you something from a much more consumer grounded point of view.
And they've got the pulse on social media, right? They're spending by default, these people are spending a lot of time on social media, so they've got a pulse on it, and you can just tap into that and get as much insights as you can, right? Some people will give you bogus answers, that's fine, but there's the gold in there that you want to mine, and that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's the case with any kind of research. You always have to be able to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, and have a sense of okay, wow, this is really something. So, but it's an interesting, way that you're taking something and working it from a different angle and coming up with good insights for your clients.
Yeah.
So roughly, and I know, like you said, it varies between the type of categories and who you're looking for as an influencer, but I'm sure people are wondering, what does all this cost, right? Because if you're running a business, one of the questions that always comes to mind sooner or later is, what does this cost?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to factor in like cost of good of your product, right? And then agency fees as well. If you're working with an agency like ourselves, that can run you, anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 a month, right? Depending on what you're looking for. It's probably other alternatives out there as well. And then you can, if you're running it in house, find apply someone to it. That's your salary for the year, right? And then after that, look at the cost of goods. So let's say you're looking to ship 100 products a month. Well, let's say that's your target, your cost of good times 100. What does that give you? If cost of good is 40, then that would be like 4,000 there. And then after that, you have to factor in, any tools that you're going to be using. So, discovery tools, management tools, and so forth, which is going to run you a couple hundred a month. And that's really the cost of setting. It's not a cheap channel to set up by any means. You can't just click and play, but what you can do is tinker with it and see if there's potential, then invest into, building the kind of potential behind it. But yeah, that's essentially what it looks like. And the end goal of any influencer program we're running is creating a list of ambassadors that we can tap into. Like, let's say we drop a new product. Well, we can tap into 100 of our ambassadors, and boom, all of a sudden our product is everywhere. We've got tons of content to roll out into our paid media. That's really the end game of any influencer program that we run, to just make sure that we end up with that small network of top end kind of creators that just drive results, that create great content, and that are easy to work with, which is something we didn't talk about all that much, but definitely something extremely important, the ease of communication. If you start dabbling with micro influencer marketing, your team or yourself will pretty quickly realize that, they're a pain to deal with in a lot of cases, right? So ease of communication is legit something that we take into consideration when vetting these influencers. Is like, okay, are they ambassadors or are they not, right? And then
right.
Yeah,
I think that's a very good point, because a lot of people who are going into this, maybe people who are in the early stages of starting a brand, are not as aware of it, but certainly if you're running a business, you have an expectation, right, from your vendors, from people who are service providers, a certain level of professionalism, shall we say. And a lot of the people who are doing this, who are influencers, are more creators, but they're not necessarily strong on that back end management, organization kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the way that you said it better than I would have said it. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's probably a lot of the reason why they need an agency to be able to run interference on that. Because like you said, if you're just working with one or two people, you can be on it. But if you've got a stable of 100 or even 50, even 25, that's a heck of a lot to manage.
Yeah. And you've got it's a lot to manage, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes all of this challenging. It's the complexity of understanding what you're marketing and then how you're managing it. And it's a beast in many ways.
It is. And that's why, people defer to agencies, right? And then because they just like, okay, well, I don't want to manage it. I don't want to manage this. And that's just part of the game. It's just like, well, let me see what I can do if I give this to someone else. And yeah.
So let me just ask you, we're talking about agencies. if a person is looking for an agency, what should they be looking for? When you're looking to work with a social media agency, what should you be looking for?
So, I mean, in our case, right, of course I'm biased, right? Like we built this agency, like with these biases in mind, but essentially like process driven is probably what you'd be looking for, right? That they've got the process down to a T. They know like which roles to fill in, what are the shoes they want to, and they can scale to the level you want them to scale, right? So like, what's your end goal? And then always go from your end goal. Like, is your end goal creating a small batch of content? Is your end goal doing the market research? What is your end goal? And then, go back to like, okay, well, what agency should we hire, right? And then I'd look for an agency with a process track record, right? Just like have they worked with other brands in the same industry? That's not as important. I know it's a question we get asked. I go, do you have a client in like, kids clothing? And then it's like, yeah, well, we have one, but like, it doesn't change anything, to be honest. Like it's really, it's almost always the same process, right? If the agency knows how to scope out your specific needs, then there's no problems there. I would say also look for someone that's asking the right questions, that thinks strategically about influencer marketing. Like, what is the strategy behind it? How are we going to position the product? Like, those are the questions I'd be looking for, like the overarching strategy. What kind of coupon are we going to give? Okay, like what kind of content are we going to create? What are your goals? Make sure that they understand your goals and how to align their processes with your goals. So that's what I look for. That's what we look for when we hire an agency, at least, right? To make sure they understand our goals, make sure they understand the resources we need. And yeah.
Yeah, I think those are good points. I think that sometimes people are enthusiastic to get started, but they don't really understand what you need to understand before you work with an agency, before you get into this whole process.
Yeah. And one of the things is really just understand the full cost of it. Like understand the full cost of it, the agency fees, and then how much is it going to cost you afterwards in product, and how much is it going to cost you in like social media management or whatever. Like think about the whole process from A to Z in terms of like, what are the real costs? Because there's the cost and then there's the real costs of like beyond the fees. Yeah.
That's so true. I mean, I think that's one of the rude awakenings that we all get when we venture into something that we haven't been doing. It's like, oh, hadn't figured on that.
Yeah. There's hidden costs everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. David, how can people get in touch with you? I think after listening to what you've been saying, a lot of people are going to want to be able to connect with you. Where can they find you?
So you can send me an email directly at david@inbeat.agency, or you can find me on LinkedIn, David Morneau, Morneau. And that's really where people can find me. Or you can actually go directly to our inbeat.agency website, book a call right there, and you'll be chatting with me, and it's going to be a pleasure for me to just walk through and see if there's a fit.
Well, I'm definitely going to put all of this in the show notes, and I really want to thank you for taking the time. I have learned a tremendous amount talking to you, and it's just such an interesting topic because of how fast shifting everything is in social media. So thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine, Jane. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with leading executives, entrepreneurs, educators, and authors who share their insights, experiences, and vision for the future of business. And make sure you visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Before you go, if you're looking for a concise view of key shifts, opportunities, and risks in global sourcing, then check out the current situation in sourcing. You'll find a link in the show notes. And don't forget to check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.